All right. So I'm very excited about this panel on more than a side job. Welcome, everybody.
Hello,
Hi,
morning.
hi, Marie.
Good morning.
So
Hey, guys.
to open, I'd like to get your points of view on the assumption of this session, right? Tell me if you believe a dedicated team is required to successfully usher a company through its digitalization journey, and if so, why? Mike, how about we begin with you?
Sure. So, at Boston Scientific, I think at a lot of other places, companies probably rarely start with a dedicated team. But as we've seen it, when we want to transition from the pilot to scaling these new capabilities across the enterprise, dedicated resources quickly becomes a key. First impressions matter. If we have an inability to deliver predictably, driven by inconsistent resourcing, it gives our team it can give our team a black eye and a bad reputation before we get started, and really give the organization a bad first impression. So, and I know this can be hard. Because when we start pilots, we're not really sure that we're in it for the long haul. And I think we haven't been perfect, but I think we've learned that making sure that we get those initial customer experiences and then set those up for success is a key.
Right. Nick, how about you?
At Essex, we chose to not have a dedicated team, and that's worked out pretty well for us. Overall, throughout the whole process, there are times in which we need specific people to be dedicated, but overall, it hasn't required any specific person to be dedicated over the full couple of years that we have been going on this MBE type journey.
And Nick, in that instance, do they suspend that person's normal role for that time period?
Yes, for the most part. Obviously, if anything specific pops up that is urgent and needs their attention, they have to go and take care of that. We're a pretty small company, so there's typically only one or two people that are capable of doing certain specific tasks. And if they're on this project, then we have to have them go take care of their other stuff and leave this just kind of hanging for a couple days.
Right. Understood. All right. Cameron, your point of view?
Because there's not a lot of coherency in the standardization of digitalization, it requires a dedicated team to understand exactly what's going on, what standards and what methodologies they want to take, as well as to have an entire coherent approach over time, and also emphasize to the employees that this is a real goal for the company, and take it very seriously and understand what the outcome should be.
Right. Thank you. And Shri, you work as a vendor with multiple companies, probably lots of different structures and approaches. What have you seen that that works? And I'm sure you've seen a mixed bag. So share with us.
Yeah, and I have seen a mixed bag, and basically, well, when you start off, sure, it's part of somebody else's job, right? If you're doing engineering, you'll do PLM. If you're running an MES system on the plant floor, you'll start to do a little bit with IoT and so on and so forth. But I'll tell you what, and it depends again on the size of the company. And so all the companies that I've consulted with, small and large, have different recipes for success, if you will, right? But what I've seen is, whether it is Industry 4.0 or just regular PLM or MES implementations or whatever else, when they fail, they essentially fail because of this entire thing about how much importance the company is giving to this particular project. Okay, so there are a couple of things, right? One is, of course, whether there is money for the project or not, which is understandable, right? But this whole thing about whatever the project is, if it's a part-time job of somebody else, which means the company doesn't think it's important enough. Again, I'm telling you that it varies between company to company depending on the size of the company, right? But if enough importance is given, then they will make sure that they put enough horsepower behind it to have a dedicated team, a dedicated leadership with aligned KPIs and KRAs that will take this project to success.
Makes sense. So now we talk about, and it's nice that there's a mix here among our group as well, of different approaches and some that work. And now sort of what are the pros and cons of each approach? Nick, maybe I'll start with you here, since you have probably a little more different approach than some of the others.
Sure. So obviously the pros of having a dedicated team is that things can happen a little more quickly. The cons, especially from my point of view, is that other things just fall by the wayside. And it really depends on what your company's focus is. So for us, our focus largely has been safety and then on-time delivery, quality, and then on-time delivery, and cost. And this other projects kind of fall a little bit lower on our priority list. And so if there's anything that's, a safety concern, we have to take care of that right away. And then, these other projects kind of come through and we hit them as much as we can. It may be your top priority and you work on it 50% of the time. And then if something else comes up, you have to take care of that first.
Understood. Mike, what do you see as the pros and cons, risks and rewards of each?
So I think, Nick called out, the pros of a dedicated team, a couple of the pros being, velocity, delivery, predictability, those are kind of naturals. I think the one other thing that's important that a dedicated team brings to the forefront, especially when we're looking to mainstream a certain capability, is that team will think about long-term supportability. That's, part-time teams that can sometimes fall through the cracks. And so having that eye on, okay, how are we going to support this across the enterprise long-term? Part-time teams, obviously, they're great in enabling you to try new things, limit initial investment, and when it doesn't pan out, you can move on to the next thing. I think the other thing, is if we can't go with a dedicated team, it's important to try to negotiate, a fixed percent, at least an alignment on, here's the percentage that we want to have these people work on this, to get some level of predictability on when we can expect things. But like Nick said, stuff comes up, life happens, and you've got to deal with things as they come.
Understood. Cameron.
I think Sri made a good point, and I think that there's a lot of it's not completely clear as to what people mean when they say, digital transformation, and they have different ideas as what that outcome would be, and then they have, obviously, as Nick said, different available resources, and so the risk in taking a part-time task force is, again, there's very little coherency in the definition. There's very little coherency in the standard, so it makes it difficult to leverage or spread those costs across industries by creating standards, and also creating coherency in what that vision or what the definition is of Industry 4.0 and what the digital transformation actually means and how it could have an impact on the business. So by having a part-time team, you're really not able to determine what, from an industry perspective, where that's going to go. And also you're not able to figure out, to take advantage of those cost savings that would be happening through the standardization. So you kind of taking responsibility without having any real control. So that's what I see as the downside in having a part-time task force. But again, each company has their own available set of resources, and so in some companies it makes perfect sense to have a part-time team, and in other senses more dedicated. But you really have to have a crack team, if you will, if they're part-time, because there's a lot of moving pieces that they have to keep track of.
Yeah. All right. And Sri, your broad perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Mike and Cameron and even Nick have said, rings true, and I don't have to repeat it. But essentially, if you want success, you can't have people's time and resources and attention right, split into 10 different projects. Then it becomes really, really hard trying to figure out what's important, what's not. And when things fall off, you're like, okay, well, there are so many projects and something's going to happen. But if something is really, really important for you, and it's a organizational imperative, it's an existential issue, and as digital is for most companies in these times, right? I think it behooves us to look at it for the importance that it needs, right? And if we don't look at dedicated teams, then you've got to have significant amount of focus on KRAs and KPIs saying that this much must be accomplished by this time, right? And it's a lot harder to do it when you're doing it with a part-time team. And so in terms of prioritization, it'll fall off. You know what's important, what's not, right? And I do believe that companies, again, not to belabor the point that it differs by company size, but I think if one has a dedicated team, has the ability to have a dedicated team, then, or if you don't, then at least break the projects up so that they can do those projects sequentially, right? And focus on something for a certain period of time and then go on to the next project. I think results matter. And if results matter, then, we see that it's more success is seen with dedicated teams than not.
And if not dedicated teams, I hear what you're saying is like not diffused approach, have a very concentrated approach to the projects.
Absolutely.
It might be worth doing a quick round robin for the 3 manufacturers we have here on how long you've been on your digital journey, because that could make a difference with your approach, right? So Nick, how long have you all been at this?
We've been at this about 2 years now. We really started making a concentrated effort around then.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, about the same. I think we started talking about, formulating a digital strategy right around 2 years ago, and just continue to evolve it.
All right. And Cameron?
I've actually been personally involved in this since the early 1990s, had a basic idea of traceability and help initiate and chair the IPC traceability standard, which was the foundational piece for IPC's Connected Factory Exchange Communication Protocol.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm also, on my personal time, participating in helping develop the IPC's digital twin standard.
Well, aren't we fortunate to have you here today?
Awesome.
Thank you, Cameron. All right, so regardless of which approach you espouse or are using, whatever the limitations or not, what should a strong and effective digital transformation team look like, and what departments should be included, in terms of the team structure for agility, speed, etc. Cameron, do you want to start us off?
Yes. So I would say that, whatever the organization does really should reflect the culture of the organization and integrate it into it. Otherwise, it's going to be an island, and you're not going to have the resource flow. You're not going to have the collaboration. You're not going to have the ability of upper management to come in and step in and help, move the group through friction points. So it really just needs to reflect the culture and values of the organization. And like Sridhar indicated, that it really needs to be a priority. Otherwise, I think, you're going to unnecessarily consume resources and not be as effective if you don't have that as one of the main parts of the company, in my personal opinion.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mike?
So, I think our approach has been really to look at it across, multiple levels of the organization when we think about our structure. So, starting from the top, we have executive sponsorship at the VP level that, sponsors each of the distinct digital capabilities that we're looking to promote. And then we have a cross-functional program management team, which I'm part of, but that has members of our manufacturing strategy team, our operations team, our global IT team, our PMO, to help teams, as we establish execution teams. And then we have dedicated product teams to deliver each one of these. And those are normally, interestingly enough, they're a mix of IT and OT people in many cases. to the, the best mix that's necessary to deliver the capability. And then we have site champions. So, normally our capabilities are developed at a, at a single site that's, that is passionate about it. And then we find it's ready for prime time and we want to roll it out. We have site reps that then, champion, how they're going to adopt the capabilities across their individual site.
Nice. I could see how that would work. Sri?
I think Mike brought up an excellent point. This whole thing about this governance structure, right? Whenever whether it was helping the automotive companies in the mid '90s or power companies more recently, whenever we try to help somebody, right? The question I ask is, who cares? Are they losing sleep over it, right? And will they go nuts, for lack of a better word, if this project doesn't happen, right? You need that hunger, you need that urgency, right, of purpose within the organization to be reflected in this governance structure. So the executive sponsor really needs to say that, if this project doesn't happen, I lose my head, right? That kind of urgency, if that comes in, everything flows down in terms of priority. There are meetings. People want to understand what's happening in different at different times within the project, and at the end of the day, where there are site champions like Mike was talking about, where people who are going to be implementing this, feel the pain, and then they say, I have to make this project a success. And so from that perspective, I think this governance structure is absolutely essential, right? That's one. The second thing that I've seen is in terms of I guess involvement, right? Whether it's a PLM system or an MES system. MES system, a lot of people will focus only on the manufacturing folks, right? Because it's essentially plant-based and so on and so forth. And sometimes when you're talking about PLM or other IT, product design IT systems, right? Then they will only revolve around engineering. Well, to have true success, we want, and we try to bring in as much involvement as possible, because there are competing priorities and across the globe and different processes, right? You might have the same division doing different things in Germany versus China versus India versus the US, right? And you want to bring everybody in the same fold so that whatever systems you're implementing, it is unique, and it has the DNA of your organization, but it can be implemented across the board, right? That's very, very important. Plus, a lot of times you need to bring in marketing and sales, right? You need to bring in after sales and the service people, right? To make sure, and this all this kind of talks about the level of maturity you have, or the level of understanding you have of your entire product development process, your NPI or NPD or whatever you want to call it. That if you understand that entire process and all the stakeholders, then you want to make sure that everybody is involved, even for a little bit, to make sure that everybody understands what the priorities are, and you're not designing a system just for the biggest dog in the compound, if you will.
Right. Makes sense. All right, so then we go to communication, right? So very important, right? And how you communicate with each department, with each other in your teams, so that you have maximum transparency, but also forward progress. So what are some of the strategies you all have approached communication within your digitalization? And Cameron, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I would say generically having as you say, communication is a mainstay, right? But different stakeholders consume information in different ways, and as we've learned in the pandemic, there are all kinds of ways to communicate. Some are more subtle, like facial expressions and hand gestures and things like that. So in the case of like this, say like Zoom or other these type of tools were very useful. Emails are very useful. Instant messages are useful. Cell phones are useful. So I think it really comes down to the culture of the organization, the pressures that are there. So like if we're in a pandemic and if it's a global type initiative, as Sri mentioned, it's going to be a totally different look than if, as Nick described, you're a small company and everybody wears multiple hats. So you really need to look at, okay, what approach is going to be consistent with what the organization's priorities are and how they normally consume information and distribute information to convert that into knowledge, and then really just trying to say, here are the tools that are available, make use of the best ones that are there, and have outcome based priorities. And then, as Reed mentioned, just saying, okay, this is, I'm going to, at the end of the day, this has got to happen, and leave it to the project managers to actually, or the folks that are driving it, to make sure that they meet the milestones and everybody stays connected all the way through, so that they, and there are a lot of mechanisms to convey what's going on at a granular level up through the organization. There are all kinds of good project management tools that can help convey those kind of information. But again, it's really just a question of having a very concise and very clear communication both ways, up and down the organizational chain, as well as the governance, and making sure everything matches. It's very consistent and works well.
Makes sense. Mike, anything to add to that?
I think one thing that we found that's worked, very well for us is to develop strong communities of practice that are meeting on a regular cadence, where a team developing a capability will actually share the progress and the challenges it's made across our broader network, and with members of other teams develop them, so they can learn from each other, and provide cross-team feedback and cross-site feedback, and understand what's coming, what might be developed that's coming down the road for their site. I mean, people love to know what's going on across the broader organization, and they love to share what they're doing, right? So so this type of interactive communication, I think, is really worked well for us.
And Shri, your perspective.
I think both Mike and Cameron have nailed it, right? I mean, this constant communication is critical for any project. We can't go off into our ivory tower, build something, and come back and then show it to people, right? So there has to be that constant communication. But what I've seen in all the implementations and consultancies that I've done across over the years, organizational change management, that's the one thing that trips every single implementation. The intent might be great, the company will pour in the dollars into it, but if they're not able to manage organizational change properly, and everything fails. And the number one reason for organizational change to fail is a communication strategy, right? So if you're picking up a large project, there has to be internal branding and awareness, right? To tell people that this is coming, right? And make them anticipate. Tell them that we're going to have town halls. Tell them that this is what we're trying to do. I mean, create small bots that'll keep telling people that, okay, this is going to happen, and this is how your job is going to change for the better, right? So those are the kind of things that I think are critically important to make sure that there's a communication strategy. You talk to people. There's branding. There are billboards made and put in the cafeteria, in the conference rooms, in different places, so that people know. Give it a name. Give your project a name, right? Call it Spitfire, call it Project Insight, call it whatever, right? Call it Change the World, Ding in the Universe. I mean, whatever you want to call it, right? Give it a name, give it an entity, give it some life, right? Let people talk about it, and all of a sudden, before you realize it, there'll be people who will be saying, "I raise my hand, Mike, and I'd like to be part of your team. Can you, can I participate outside of my regular job," right? That's when you bring in the forces of the community within the organization. So I mean, I think it's critical, right? So this is one thing. A communication strategy is one thing that I think we simply cannot take lightly.
I like the branding approach you're taking. Give it a little marketing, right? And give it a little fun and make it speak.
And
to
doesn't
people.
cost much, right?
Yeah.
Give it a name, right? Give it logos, right? Put screensavers on people's computers and say that this is coming, right? And people say, "Oh, what is this?" And throw in some surprise parties, kind of a thing. I mean, a bunch of different things can be done to engage folks, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be part of a winning story, right? So I think that's something that I've seen work magic.
And next I'd move on to communication with upper management. So the best strategies for hits and misses. What have you found the best approaches have been? Nick?
Yeah, just to elaborate on what some of the other guys said about communication in general, we've been showcasing some of the different things, and it's really that we're going to roll out, and it's really been instrumental in helping gain support from everybody. Everyone's really excited about it, and it's just a matter of making sure we follow through and we don't make their jobs harder by doing this at the same time. Making sure we take in their input and make it work for everyone. And then as far as communicating with upper management, we found the best way for us is really just regular monthly type meetings. So we use an agile type management structure for this. And so it's already segmented into, we have 4-week sprints. And at the end of each sprint, we have a little showcase for upper management that says, this is what we did, this was how much time we spent, this was how much money we spent, and this is what we got out of it. And it's really helped kind of show what all we're putting into it and what we're getting out of it.
Awesome. Cameron, anything to add to that?
No, other than like Sri said, once it's amazing what you can do if you actually give something a name. It actually becomes very important. And historically, what I found, regardless of the organization, is that upper management is going to, take in information in ways that make sense to them. So in large measure, they're going to define what that is, and they're also, it's going to be obviously part of communication is a collaboration with the other folks you're trying to exchange ideas with. So it's really okay. They say I'd like to see it this way, but it's more of an editor type situation. And I think the if you take a fast fail approach, then that way you'll get to the answer much quicker. And then also there'll be also that kind of cascades through the organization in terms of saying, okay, let's get to the answer quickly. And there's not like a blame game thing going on. I mean, it's just a question of figuring out, okay, how do I send that information to you and you give me the answers as quickly as I can. So, because you're trying to get to the answer as quickly as possible. So I think that's really probably, in my personal opinion, the best approach.
Great. And of course, the other piece of communication is with your vendors. So Shri, I'm going to let you take this question and tell us what works and what doesn't.
I'll tell you what doesn't work first, right? I've been a manufacturing guy in my past lives. I'm a techie, right? And most of us, well, at least I have seen, right, within my community of engineers and scientists, most of us focus on details so much that our presentations look like little white papers, right? Whole lot of information, and it might be very, very important to us. You show that to upper management, and they're just staring at it, and they don't know what to make of it, right? And if we don't put ourselves in their shoes, then all bets are off in terms of we have to grab their attention. They need to know, or rather, we want them to know what we are trying to tell them, right? So essentially, don't show them what you want to show them. Show them what they want to see, right? So create an executive dashboard, okay? Talk to each person separately and say, what do you care in this project? The CFO will only care about the money spent on the project and the timeline. Are we meeting the timeline, right? And different people, right? The manufacturing specialists or the VP of engineering or manufacturing would say, okay, is this matching the product development timeline, right? Are we going to be, overshooting? Excuse me. So those are some of the things that you have to figure out. What makes different people tick, right? What's important to different people. The other thing is, take your updates and talk to each person separately. Don't come into the meeting with 7 people looking at you and start presenting, because they'll start talking among themselves. Somebody will say, I'm confused, I don't understand this. The others will pile on, and all of a sudden your meeting's a disaster, right? Make sure that you show this beforehand to all the different people, get buy-in, right? And say that I'm going to be asking this, what do you think? I'm going to be saying this, what do you think? I need your counsel on this, right? Get them to really get involved with you, right? Seek their opinion with an open heart. Once you do that, when you walk into the meeting, everybody is supporting you, right? And I think that's absolutely critical. People might think it's a little it's a bit of a ploy to play it this way, but it is important. You don't want that project to bomb, right? And I also, in terms of presentation, don't bore them with details that they don't need to know, right? Tell them key points that that will affect each one of them. This is how it affects you, Mike. This is how it affects you, Ken. This is how it affects you, Nicholas, right? So that way, everybody is that much more interested, right? So I think Guy Kawasaki's trick applies here. 10, 20, 30, right? 10 slides, 20 minutes, and minimum font size is 30. So which means you put less text, more graphic, and kind of show what they need to see. And then they say, you know what? And by the way, save that time, right? If the meeting's for half an hour, finish it off in 20 minutes, they'll love you for it.
All interesting tips,
Yeah.
and really well thought out. And I could see where that would work. So you almost have to have the pre-meetings for the meeting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What do you think? I mean, Cameron and Mike, I mean, you guys are veterans in the industry. I mean, what works at your place? I mean,
I think I got a great piece of advice once from one of my old bosses, and especially when you talk about presentations, and he goes, lead with the punchline. Start your presentation by telling people why they're there, and then explain why, the supporting information of what you're trying to do. Otherwise, they're going through the whole meeting and they're guessing. Why are we sitting through all this? Why am I here? If you take that out, then they can focus on the material that you're presenting in context of what decision you're asking them to make. I think the other thing when it comes to communicating, with our execs, I found is, the key to these things is business value, right? We need to, that's what they're looking for. What does this bring to the table for the business? One of our executive sponsors has a great, way of putting it. He said, this can't turn into engineering Disneyland. This has to deliver real value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I would say
I'm going to steal that from you, Mike.
Okay.
so.
Yes, sir.
Both Mike and Sri make good points, and to me, a really concise way to look at it, and I shared this earlier in my career that made a big difference, and that is the Heimeyer Catechism. It was named after George Heimeyer, who ran DARPA from 1975 to 1977. So he starts off, and he first of all, in all this, you don't articulate your objectives using any jargon whatsoever, but you ask the question, for the audience, what is the punchline? But the way to do that is to say, what are you trying to do? How is it done today? And what are the limits of the current practice? What's new in your approach? And why do you think it will be successful? Who cares? If you're successful, what difference will it make? What are the risks and payoffs? How much will it cost? How long will it take? What are the midterm and final exams to check for success? And I think if you follow those when you're doing a presentation, I think it'll be ahead every time.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the rule book. I mean, I think we should capture all this and make a nice little presentation out of it, because it's so important, right? I mean, I attended this Gartner session in which the presenter talked about how to present to your board, right? Presenting to your manager, presenting to the executive team within the company, and presenting to the board, very, very different motivations for each one, right? I mean, and I think we should maybe have a different session, and I would love to chat with you folks about it.
Yeah. Right, indeed. I mean, it's just like anything written, right? Even if you're a newspaper writer or a magazine writer, you have to consider your audience and write to the audience, right? So in order to galvanize or grab their attention. So
Sometimes the best ideas get thrown away because people don't understand what you're trying to do.
indeed, indeed. All right, so then the next step is, some of you who have dedicated digitalization teams, tell us a little bit about how you convinced, if it required convincing, upper management to strategically and financially support that dedicated team approach. Mike, I know you started and have done both, and
Yeah, so I think it really comes to, when you start, when we started with our initial POCs, as I talked about before, figuring out which ones deliver real value, get a compelling story for them, deliver on those POCs and pilots, and then show how that can deliver value across the org. That's where you sell the fact that if we get a dedicated team, here's the value we're going to incrementally deliver over time. I think the thing is, we don't really ask for the dedicated teams until we're ready to go prime time with a specific capability. Some of the POC work will ask for much more limited investment, but tailor the investment and the asks to the business value, and that seems to work pretty well.
right. Nick, anything to add to that? I know, have you tried? Is that something that you've broached or something you're working toward?
It's been broached a couple of times and we've talked about it back and forth. One of the biggest things that is kind of, well, obviously the small company idea of wearing lots of hats is kind of pushing against it, but also there was a worry that when we go to full scale implementation, if you have a full-time job and you're completely pulled out of the manufacturing plant, how do we get that communication and that trust level up to where you're going to be able to implement on the floor what you've designed? And it was kind of thought that it might be better for us to still have a part-time job while we're doing this so we can maintain those relationships and really make sure that our implementation goes well.
Okay. Sri, any points of view from the vendor
Yeah,
side?
I think Mike said it right. It's all in the ROI, but you, excuse me, you give enough good reasons as to why this has to happen. You get them excited, and then typically I think, like Mike said, you don't ask for a dedicated team up front, right? You present this entire thing, get them to start salivating, right? And they need to want the project as deeply as you do, right? And the best results are when the CEO says, or whoever, right, says, okay, so that's great, Sri, so what do you want to make this successful? You tell me and we'd get it done. And I say, well, I need your counsel. What do you think? What do you think it is going to make this happen? I have got some ideas, of course, but I don't want to, I want to hear from you. And so what happens is then they start saying that this must happen and that must happen, and your dedicated team will happen, right? Give them the business case, give them enough to get really, really excited about, and get them to kind of tell you that you need a dedicated team. You go asking for a dedicated team, it's like playing defense, right? So
It sounds to me like we also need a little salesmanship and a little bit of Sriism. So hopefully you carry out that with you, because those are all great suggestions, and how you present something and how you ask for something matters, right? And if you make it sort of somebody else's idea, it's even better if they come up with the idea themselves, right? Any final thoughts? Something we didn't broach or something that came to mind while we were going along and you'd like to impart to our audience? Anyone? We hit everything?
I think we did.
Yeah, I think it's just important for the organization, the leadership, to decide exactly what they want the outcome to be. Some may be, a faster horse, if you will, and some may end up being an automobile. Because I don't know if it's really attributed to Henry Ford, but I remember a quote that at least some people think that he said it. I don't know if it's true or not, but said that if you'd asked customers before the automobile what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And some and right now, some people are going after a faster horse, and some people are looking at automobiles. So, and some people looking at rocket ships. So it'll be really interesting to see where it all ends up.
Indeed. Indeed. Well,
I think-
all great tips. I thank you
Yeah.
all so much for your contribution and your thoughtfulness. And you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
too.
Thank you. Nice meeting you guys, Cameron, Mike,
Same.
Nick, and Maureen. I hope that we can connect sometime soon.
Look
Yeah,
forward to
sounds
it.
great.
Sounds good.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.